I'm Andy Reslan. I work on the Couchbase Mobile team. I'm currently working on Sync Gateway. So first of all, why Sync Gateway? There's a couple of scenarios where you're going to want to use Sync Gateway. And the first scenario we'll look at is where you've already got Couchbase Server, you already have an application, and you want to either share some of your documents with mobile users, or maybe you want to start collecting data from the edge, and you want to collect the data from the mobile devices, maybe content, images, videos, and bring those into your Couchbase server for processing. A second scenario is where you've got a greenfield project. You want to deploy a mobile application using Couchbase Lite, and you need a mechanism for your mobile apps to coordinate and communicate, possibly backing up data, replicating data across users' devices, or maybe for a social app where you want data to be shared between certain users who are maybe in chat rooms or collaborating on projects and documents. So what is Sync Gateway? Basically, Sync Gateway is acting as an intermediary between your mobile apps and your Couchbase server, where you're going to persist your documents. Data is communicated between Sync Gateway and the mobile apps using replication. And by using Couchbase Lite, your apps can store documents locally, and those documents can be a subset of the documents you store in Couchbase Server. You may have a million documents in Couchbase Server, but each mobile app for a particular user may only want to be pulling down 10, 20, or a few hundred documents. And apps can create data at the edge, can create documents, content, and those can be shared with other mobile apps or Couchbase server via the Sync Gateway. And the Sync Gateway facilitates bidirectional multi-master sync. And you've seen other presentations where we talk about multiple users editing documents concurrently and how conflicts are handled in those cases. So when Sync Gateway is acting as the intermediary between mobile and server, it's speaking mobile replication protocol to the mobile devices, and that's a bidirectional protocol. So documents can move up to the mobile devices, and again, content can be created on the edge and pushed down into Couchbase Server via the Sync Gateway. And Sync Gateway is using Couchbase Server to store its documents as its persistent store. So Sync Gateway and Couchbase Lite allow mobile apps to store data locally. But to do this, if you've got a large number of documents in your Couchbase server, you want to control which documents are actually going to be available to those users on the mobile device. So Sync Gateway has to authenticate the users that are connecting to it so that it knows who they are. It has to authorize document access so that those users only access documents that your application logic says they should have access to. And Sync Gateway also is responsible for routing the right documents to the right users and routing documents between users if it's a social app where you're sharing certain data between certain users. As I said, Sync Gateway facilitates bidirectional sync between mobile devices, Couchbase Server, and possibly between multiple mobile devices. And to do this, Sync Gateway adds its own metadata to the documents as they're stored in Couchbase Server. We store access history, so who was given access to channels within the history of the document, which channels the document's been mapped to. We also track document revisions, and as you've seen in previous presentations, revisions can be in conflict, so Sync Gateway supports revision trees. Conflict resolution is not done within Sync Gateway, but the information can be replicated out to the devices where the conflict resolution will take place. And Sync Gateway also provides the ability to validate document updates. You can validate against a schema, and you can validate which users are trying to update which documents, and we'll look at that in more detail a little later. So what we're going to run through here is a scenario where you quickly you download, install, and configure Sync Gateway. Really at this level as a developer, so this will be a sort of first contact with Sync Gateway. There's multiple ways of getting Sync Gateway. You can download pre-built binaries. You can build from source by downloading, checking out from GitHub. And there's also AMI packages available if you want to run on the cloud. So here's once you've downloaded your binary and installed, there's just one single command, the Sync Gateway command. So we're just going to dive straight in. And this is straight out of the box, no additional configuration startup. So some of the things to take away here. We're going to expose a default database, Sync Gateway, over HTTP. In this particular case, we're going to use the built-in Walrus in-memory database, which is not for production, but for a first start developer. Gets you up and running really quickly without any additional configuration. And Sync Gateway has two ports that it exposes. One is an admin port, which normally you keep private. You don't expose to the internet. And this is by default on 4985. And a public port, 4984, which is for general user access from mobile apps. So once this is up and running, if it's running on my laptop or another server, then I can point a browser to the server on the public port, 4984. And the default database name we append to the end on the path, so in this case, Sync Gateway. And here's just some initial first contact points that you might want to try. So the first request we're going to run against the admin API, against that Sync Gateway default database, and we just get some initial stats, which gives us a first confidence that Sync Gateway is up and running. Then we might want to connect to the public API on 4984, and again we point it at the database, and we see here that we get an unauthorized access to that database, and we can then, there is a guest account, and we can go and look at why we're not getting access. And if we go in on the admin API, Sync Gateway database, and we look up the user guest, you can see that at the end of there, that guest account has been disabled. So the only way to access this particular Sync Gateway will be to provide credentials. So that's straight out of the box. The next thing we'll typically want to do is configure the Sync Gateway for our particular use. And there's two ways to configure Sync Gateway, which are complementary. One is on command line. So Sync Gateway --help shows us what the command line options are. And the other option is to pass Sync Gateway a configuration file. So you can see in the second option, we're going to pass a JSON configuration file. And the advantage of that is that if you're running multiple databases, the configuration can get quite large. So it allows you to contain that in a single file. So let's have a look at an example of a simple configuration file. So in here, we're defining one or more databases. And in this case, we're defining a database, myCallApp, and that's its public database name that will be exposed over HTTP on the public port and the admin port. We're going to now use Couchbase Server as our data storage. So we are going to provide a server URL to connect to our Couchbase Server, and we define the name of the bucket that we're going to use on Couchbase Server. We can also, at this point, add static user accounts. So here we're defining the guest account. It's not disabled this time, so we can just use guest without credentials. And we're giving guest access to all documents by passing, again, a static list of channels as star for that particular user. So this is a good way to get up and running first time against Sync Gateway without having to worry about user authentication. We need to create our backing store in Couchbase Server. It's just a static screen here. And I'm creating a bucket called Sync Gateway, which matches my configuration. And this is a clean bucket, so there's no existing data here. And this bucket will belong totally to the use of Sync Gateway. So now when we start Sync Gateway up again using this new configuration file, you'll see that it's actually exposing a DB, this time myCallApp, and it's going to use the Couchbase Server bucket called Sync Gateway, and we can see that it's pointing to the URL we've defined in our JSON configuration file. And again, just to give ourselves a sanity check, we can point the browser or command to the public port, myCallApp, and we get some basic stats back, just giving us confidence that Sync Gateway is up and running with the right configuration. Now, Sync Gateway on its own, no good. It needs to be used in the context of mobile app. And if you've seen some of the other presentations, they go into much more depth. This is just a bare bones example of the code you might have on the mobile app side. We basically take the URL of our database that we've just set up. We create a push and a pull replicator against that URL. We set those replicators both to continuous, so they'll run for the duration that the app is running on the mobile device, or at least is in the foreground. And then we start both the push and the pull replication running. And at that point, anything we create in our local database on the mobile app will be push synchronized to Sync Gateway. And any documents that get assigned to us within Sync Gateway will be pull replicated up to the mobile device. So in these few steps, we've basically got the Sync Gateway up and running. We've backed it with a dedicated Couchbase Server bucket, and our client apps can now replicate with that particular database. But we've still got a few things left to do to actually produce a typical scenario for a real application. So we need to cover user authentication, document authorization, access control, and also what we want to do if we want to use an existing Couchbase server that's already populated with a large data set, and we want to share that with mobile apps and users. So next we'll cover user authentication. So Sync Gateway manages the mobile user accounts itself. It has a user database, and this can be administered via a REST API. And we provide a number of authentication mechanisms for the mobile apps. We support HTTP basic auth. We support session cookies. There's a Facebook integration for auth. And there's also custom auth. So if you have single sign-on server already, or you wish to do your initial credential authentication via an app server, You can do that, and then using the REST API with Sync Gateway, you can create users in Sync Gateway's user database, set permissions, set access on those users, and delete them if users are then removed from your application. So the user admin API is against each database that you create. It'll have its own user database. So the path will be the database name, _user, and then the unique username for each user. Through the REST API, you can create users, retrieve user information, update user information, possibly updating passwords or updating their default access. And you can also delete users from that URL. So users have a number of attributes. The most important one is user ID, and this is immutable. So once a user's created, the ID can't be changed. If you need to migrate a user, you would delete the existing user account, create a new account with a new user ID. When you provide a password for a user account, this is write-only, and we use a secure one-way hashing algorithm, bcrypt, to encrypt the password and store, and then we throw the password away. Users also have access privileges. You can give access to default channels, and we'll go into channels in a lot more depth. And you can also assign roles to users. And roles really provide a way of collecting multiple channels together. So you can assign them to users very, very quickly, a pre-configured set of channels, which gives them a pre-configured set of access rights. So the next topic is channels and the sync function. And first question to answer is, what are channels? So we can look at channels in a number of different ways. One is that a channel is a tag that's attached to a document. And we can then find all the documents that have the same tag and associate them together. And the other way of looking at channels is that they provide a message queue of document updates or changes to documents, document creation within those channel tags. And we can use that mechanism for effectively sharding a large data set. So we can have very small sets of documents which are tagged uniquely and maybe only shared by a small number of users, even though there may be hundreds of thousands of documents in the Couchbase server. And the sync function is how we provide those access rights or assign access rights to documents and users. And a sync function is a JavaScript function, and it's defined in Sync Gateway config file that we looked at earlier, and we'll look at a more sophisticated version of that shortly. The sync function takes as its input the new document that we're trying to write into Sync Gateway, and also previous revision. If the document previously existed, then we pass in the other revisions, and this allows you to compare the current update with what's currently stored in the database, and that may allow you to basically not allow that document to be written because it doesn't meet some criteria that you have in your application. So capabilities of the sync function. We can enforce document validity, so you may want to only allow documents in your application that meet a certain schema. This could be a formal schema validation, or it may just be that you want to check certain properties of a document, that all the fields you need exist, otherwise you'll reject the document. We can also enforce that the user that's trying to write the current document has a specific user ID, or belongs to a specific role. So we could have an admin role, and only admin will be allowed to write certain types of documents into our application. And it's the responsibility of the sync function to tag documents with channel names. So as documents are written, the sync function will decide which channels those documents should be attributed to. And we can also define user access to those channels within the sync function. So if we have a document that contains, say, a number of reader usernames, we then can assign those usernames to the channel that the document's been mapped to so that those users have read access. So this is a little interactive demo of the overview process of putting a document into Sync Gateway, how the sync function can then map it to a number of channels, and then how those channels are mapped to the users on the end devices. So we've got two end devices, one belonging to Jens and one belonging to Anil, and we have a number of channels that are set up within Sync Gateway. And we're going to pass a document in on the left here. It has a project name associated with it. And at the moment, these channels have already been mapped to Jens and Anil, so any documents appearing in these particular channels will then be routed to the mobile devices that these users are using. So we're going to pass the document to the sync function. And for this particular document, the sync function that we've defined is going to assign this document to the proj2 channel and the public channel. And here's a snippet of a sync function that's doing that. So the channel command allows us to assign the document to a named channel. And in this case, if an access level property in the document is below a certain level, then the document will be mapped to the public channel as well. So once the document's been tagged with these two channels, the document update that we've just pushed will now appear in the message queues or the message feeds for these two particular channels, proj2 and public. And then any user that authenticates with Sync Gateway and attaches to Sync Gateway starts up a replication, pull replication. We'll see they're mapped to those channels, the documents are waiting in those channels, and they'll be replicated up to the user's mobile device. So now let's write a sync function with some of these features in that we've looked at. So the first thing to note with our sync function is before the input to the sync function is the current version of the document we're trying to write to Sync Gateway. And here's an example here. And in this particular case, this document already exists in Sync Gateway, so we've also passed the previous version of the document to allow us to compare with the update with, and that will allow us to take certain actions if the new document is not correctly formatted for our application purposes. So first of all, the two things we want to achieve. We want to make sure that every document that's passed into this application has an owner. And when we say has an owner, we're talking about a property on the document. So we can see this document has owner Alice. So we basically check if document owner is in the document, and if it's not, if that property doesn't exist, we can throw an exception with a message which will be passed back to the client. The second thing we want to achieve is we want to make sure that the owner property is immutable. So that means that if a document already exists within Sync Gateway and a new revision of the document is pushed in, that it must be owned by the same person. So in this particular case, we first check that there is an old doc, there is an existing version of the document, and if there is, that the owner of the current document is the same as the owner of the old document. And if it's not, then we're going to throw an exception that the owner has changed and that's not valid for this particular application. And then we want to do some more processing. So the next thing we want to check is that the owner of the document is the user who created the document. So within the context of the function, we know the user that's been authenticated against Sync Gateway, and we know that the sync function can check that user ID. So we're basically saying that we require the current user that's posting this document to match the property owner within the document itself. So in this case, if the person who's authenticated with Sync Gateway is not Alice, then that person can't write a document that claims to have an owner of Alice. And we also want to make sure that in this case, only users with a creator role can create new documents. So we can basically say that the current authenticated user is required to have be a member or have been given access to the role of creators. So once we're happy that this is a valid document within the scope of our application, we can now add a channel tag to the document. And the name of the tag can either be hard-coded, but more usually, you'll use information from the content of the document itself. And in this case, we're going to use the value of category property, riddle, to define the channel name. So this document will be tagged with the riddle channel. Now the document's been tagged with the riddle channel, but we haven't necessarily assigned any users to that channel, so no one's actually going to be able to see the document. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to assign all the users in the readers list for this document. And we want to assign them access to the channel that we're going to create as well. So we're going to create a new channel for this document. We're going to tag another channel onto it. And this time we're going to tag the channel readers plus the doc ID. And then we're going to give access to all the names defined in the readers property. And we're going to give them access to that new channel that we've just created. So what we've done here, we've now authenticated our users, and we've also implemented document authorization so that we can control which users can create documents, which users can update documents, and we've also given access to other users to read the channels those documents are mapped to. So the one thing we still need to do is look at the case where we have an existing data set, we have an existing Couchbase server with populated data and documents, and we want to share those with mobile apps, and how we do that and what we need to be careful of when we do that. So one of the things, if you're going to use an existing database bucket, is you probably don't want to modify the documents that are already stored there. They're already part of an application. Sync Gateway stores its metadata, sync metadata against documents. And if you point it directly at a bucket that's already populated, Sync Gateway is going to start modifying those documents and adding sync data to metadata to them. And that's not really what we want to do. So if we have an existing data set we want to share with our mobile clients, we know Sync Gateway really wants to own its own bucket because of the replication metadata. It's storing user accounts in that bucket. It's also storing roles in that bucket. So we don't want to point Sync Gateway at your original data. It's going to interfere with those. And Also, Sync Gateway won't be aware when your current application modifies its documents concurrently with Sync Gateway. It won't know they've been modified, and the state of the database is not going to be clear. So the solution we have at the moment is that we introduce the idea of a shadow bucket. So as we did earlier, Sync Gateway, you create an empty bucket for Sync Gateway. Sync Gateway owns that bucket and all of the contents in it. But you can also point Sync Gateway at your existing bucket, and it will shadow your existing bucket, but without modifying the documents there, by adding the sync metadata and adding user records and role records. And the way that we tell Sync Gateway to use the shadow bucket is via the configuration file. And if we take our original configuration file for the MyCall app database, we can add additional properties for a shadow bucket, which could be on a different Couchbase server, but we'll point to the same Couchbase server here. And the Couchbase server bucket we're going to shadow is the Megacorp database bucket. And again, just to reiterate, so the original bucket is a new empty bucket that Sync Gateway owns. And we're going to shadow against our original existing bucket with our application data in. So we've now accomplished the final step, which is to use existing data set with our Sync Gateway instance. And actually, that's the end of my presentation, I think. Oh, not too bad. So I've got a few minutes now for any Q&A. Yes?
So what do you need to do when you scale Sync Gateway? You just add the horizontal servers and put them behind a load balancer? Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, so the question is, what do you need to do to scale Sync Gateway? So the Sync Gateway instances are share nothing. So at the moment, the way to scale would be to add additional instances of Sync Gateway. And for our demo cluster, which is being used as the gateway for the Connect app that we've been using here. So we run that we run 2 Sync Gateways and 2 Couchbase Server instances behind a reverse proxy. And so if we wanted to scale that out, we'd scale that horizontally by adding more server instances. Oh, yep.
Would it be possible to use the SQLite C# client on desktop applications?
So, not sure I heard everything, but I think the question was, can you use the C# Couchbase Lite on desktop? Yeah, so any of the Couchbase Lite clients basically will replicate with the Sync Gateway. They're all using the same replication protocol. So you can mix and match between mobile clients, desktop clients, embedded clients as well. Yes?
The shadow bucket, does that just store the key from the primary bucket and then add on the metadata for the Sync Gateway?
Again, I didn't necessarily fully hear the whole question. I'll try and answer it. If I get it wrong, tell me, and I'll go have a second bite. Basically, the documents in the shadow bucket, the Sync Gateway monitors the tap feed from the Couchbase server, so it can pick up changes to those documents. Was the question about the document IDs?
Yeah, I was wondering if it's just the keys that come over to the shadow.
Oh, I see. No, so the contents of the documents will come to the shadow as well, and then we add the sync metadata onto those documents. That allows the document to be replicated to the mobile device and then modified or edited there and then synced back again. Yes.
So if I have one terabyte of the bucket, then I will have another more than 1 terabyte of the shadow bucket. All right?
Yes, on the sync gateway, and then obviously you can partition that data down as to what actually gets replicated to the mobile clients.
So how many replica is the shadow bucket? There's only one shadow bucket, or
So how many?
the shadow bucket is not have a replica.
Oh, okay. So if I understood, so the question is, I think you're asking is the shadow bucket. It can be a cluster. So it's a standard Couchbase instance or a Couchbase cluster. So we just see it as a single database, but implementation-wise, it could be a very big cluster.
I think this question was about replicas. So
Oh,
he's asking about which you would want to set up replicas for the sync gateway bucket. Maybe even have it, if you really want it to be available. Right?
oh, I see. Yes. So sorry. Again, the sync gateway bucket can be on a cluster, so you could have master replica. I guess if the shadow bucket's your sort of primary system, you may not need as many replicas on the sync gateway bucket. But if you want high availability, then yes, you could have replicas there as well. Yes.
The shadow bucket, does that synchronization from the original only happen one time?
No, so from the shadow bucket, we're monitoring the tap feed from the instance or the cluster. So your application can still be working on that data, making changes and updates. And we'll see those changes coming in. And so that'll be mirrored in the sync gateway. Those documents can also be edited by the mobile clients and pushed back, and those will be reflected back in your application.
The negport bucket,
Yeah.
so that happens once from negport to the shadow bucket?
There's I think, I'm not sure if there's an initial data like this. There must be an initial data load. Looking at my colleagues there, but I'm not sure. I think there's an initial data load, and then we're using the tap feed for picking up the changes. Yeah.
Actually, there's another sync between the shadow and also the original bucket.
Yes. Yeah, so there's, we'll sync the changes between the sync gateway and the shadow bucket. But the reason changes coming from the shadow bucket into sync gateway will get the metadata added, or the sync gateway metadata added. But changes going other way will strip out that additional metadata. So you don't see any of the sync gateway metadata appearing back in your shadow bucket. Okay. Thank you very much.